This video comes second in a 4-part series on basic bibliographical observation. It builds on the first part, which introduces basic techniques for observation and explains the aims of the whole series. As before, I will demonstrate these principles using materials familiar to me, but I encourage you to alter these techniques for your own books. Let's consider evidence that is hard to see without the help of special tools. Unlike the features described in the first video, which a practiced reader can see but might ignore, this evidence requires extraordinary attention to see. Some people call this kind of evidence forensic or analytical. These tools and systems might be called extensions, supplements, or technical media, while a practitioner might be engaged in analytical bibliography, in a platform study, or in question document examination. Those who study books often enjoy uncovering new evidence by trying new tools or modifying existing techniques. When pursuing a particular problem, we need to think about what sort of evidence we need and thus what tools and techniques suit the problem. Then we must consider whether or not we can apply them in our own situation. Techniques and their associated tools require different amounts of support from other people. So I class them as either laboratory techniques or as scholarly techniques. Laboratory techniques require the support of grants, teams, or existing institutions. Scholarly techniques must be available to typical scholars working with typical materials at typical places. For example, in a special collections reading room, you will follow usage guidelines. The librarians want to help, so often approve of or provide familiar tools that don't harm the books. Even outside of libraries, scholars must be able to procure and use any scholarly tools without exceptional permission from the caretakers of the material that interests them. Laboratory techniques and scholarly techniques both use high technology tools and low technology tools. Laboratory techniques frequently employ a special team for their high-tech tools. Scholarly techniques can be used by any scholar when they use certain low-tech tools. But some formerly high-tech, now low-tech tools still require a laboratory and a team for validation. For example, old-fashioned wet bench chemical assay. Furthermore, some high-tech tools have become accessible, affordable, and productive for most scholars. For example, digital photography. Put simply, simple tools work best. For example, a bright light can be used to look through a sheet of paper to see where it is thinner, or highlight the texture of the surface of a sheet of paper by putting it to the side. A ruler can measure distances precisely. These distances can be compared with each other. Magnifying glasses, handheld microscopes for children, self-illuminated borescopes used to inspect plumbing, thread-counting magnifiers, jeweler's loupes, and macro lenses for digital cameras can all be used to see small features in identified printing techniques. Because they have a more popular use than bibliographical observation, they generally cost much less than specialized tools. These tools can be used by individual scholars wherever they happen to be. So techniques based on them can be easily repeated to examine multiple copies of books. Scholarly techniques can travel and can be applied without much preparation. I imagine them as things that everyone can buy at a local hardware store, throw in a backpack, and travel to another continent with. Some old laboratory techniques use now commonplace technology, so have become scholarly. Optical collation once required expensive machines with special optics, but these machines can now be found at many prominent institutions. There are also portable digital collators that use the shockingly good resources available in today's portable computers, like the Traherne digital collator and Pocket Hinman. However, some people still don't trust these tools, so you may not be able to use them everywhere. In any case, whatever sort of technique and tool you use, you need to practice it, preferably with guidance. Afterwards, the procedure follows the same basic outline from the first video. Find all the features that interest you, and write down what they look like and where they occur. Let me again demonstrate with something that's familiar to me, the same 17th century English poem from the first video. Remember that whatever you study will also have features that can be studied with tools, but they may be different than these. My basic toolkit contains a ruler and a light. Let's use them to see what we can see. If we shine the light through the page, we can see the shadow of the mold on which the paper formed. Each line aligns with a rib on the mold, and there's a design on it as well. We can also see which side of the paper is rougher or smoother. Since we know the book is octavo, let's write down the measurements and locations of all these shadows in an octavo layout. The accounting takes some time and practice, but if you remember that each page covers an eighth of a sheet, in this octavo at least, another format would be different, you can work out that you have measured each distance twice by measuring each page. If you look at the measurements, you can see that the paper in this one book comes from 2 different molds, each with differing spacing between the ribs. Other copies of the book may combine paper differently, and so are worth looking at and comparing with these measurements. Now, let's look at the letters on the page. Shining the light sideways, we can see certain characters pushing the ink up on the opposite side of the leaf. This means that the raised side was printed first and pushed up by the side printed second. Note also the square of the text, which we can measure along with the distances between margins and headlines. Let's write down some of these measurements. The accounting here takes a bit more work, but follows essentially the same pattern as that for the shadows, but in 2 directions. I'm showing you with a sheet of paper, but most people prepare a spreadsheet that does this automatically for the book that you're working on. Here, we can see several different patterns of spaces around the text. You might wonder what this means. The octavo format includes spacing material between the pages, which the printers might reuse. After printing some pages, they could take out the old type and put in new type, but leave the furniture that provided the spacing around those pages. Some people call these skeleton forms, and they interest people who work with movable type books. They count them and see how they're reused because it helps indicate the scale of different printing operations. The order of printing coordinates with this evidence to help assemble the sequence of events that happen during printing a book. We begin to get a picture of what the print shop looked like that produced this book nearly 400 years ago. In all, from these basic bibliographical observations using scholarly techniques, we can better understand how this book was assembled and what to look out for in similar books. Did everyone use paper like this? Do other copies do it differently? What were the general habits of printers at the time? Since this book is unauthorized, it doesn't have a printer listed, so figuring this out might help us understand who was printing the book and why. This video only showed you just a few techniques, but you can read about and discover many, many more. It's merely a matter of noticing what you can see with a tool and noting it down, and then trying to figure out how that could have happened.